episode of The Big Booth. This is our new podcast originating from Stumptown Station, Matthews, North Carolina. If you're listening to us, you can also go to YouTube channel and see the video of this being recorded. Likewise, if you're watching us on YouTube, hi. You can go to your favorite podcast provider and be able to find that. So lots of ways to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and the Twitter machine. I don't know if we're on the Twitter machine, but
I don't twote.
We're on the
So, I'm not much of a twoter.
All right, well, yeah, but hey, before we go any further and get into doing what the hell we're doing with the podcast, let me introduce my co-host here. My co-host, he is widely known by at least 4 different people that aren't related to him as the Gordon Ramsay of cocktails. He's also the co-owner of Stumptown Station, Brandon Mills.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the pilot episode.
Very excited.
Here
very
we
excited.
are.
Cheers,
yeah,
my friend.
absolutely. So, before we get into all the details about it, tell me a little bit about the Big Booth and what you wanted to accomplish by doing this with the bar as the owner.
Well, at Stumptown Station, we try to do as many different educational moments as we can throughout all of our cocktails and all of the things that we offer. We feature a lot of locally distilled spirits. So we work very hard to make sure that our local distilled spirits are featured in a lot of the cocktails that we do. So we go very hard on educational purposes. We talk a lot about how different liquors are made, how different cocktails came about, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. We're going to talk about some of the history. So we go really, really in depth on a lot of the things that we offer with our guests. We try to make it very interesting when you're just sitting at the bar. So we try to make it a fun little conversation.
And so now you'll be able to listen to it on your favorite podcast provider in your car, while you're working out, while you're, kind of doing, while you're on the way to the bar, while you're sitting at work, watching us on YouTube, pretending to work, all of that stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah. So let's see. In each episode, we're going to be highlighting what's coming up at the bar. We're going to be diving a little deeper into some of the topics you might be interested in. So, like, for example, the background and history on some of the specialty cocktails we have available here at Stumptown Station. We'll be doing some staff spotlights so you can meet the staff and get to know them a little more. We'll be doing some musician spotlights. So all the musicians that normally play here that are watching and listening, be ready. We'll be doing some feature stories, like, what's the story behind the bar? How did the idea for opening this thing come apart?
Both, yeah.
come about. And then we'll do some distiller spotlights, so like Muddy River and Great Wagon Road Distilling. And we haven't told them yet. So Robbie, Ollie, we'll be texting you soon.
Coming your way.
And then Q&A with Brandon, which might be one of my favorite spots. Is going to be in every single episode. You'll be able to ask Brandon anything you want. Submit your questions. You can send them to us at thebigBooth@stumptownstation.com, and we'll go through and pick out some of the good ones and be able to read them on the next episode. So I don't have any idea how often we're going to do episodes yet. It sort of depends on your feedback and what you think. It's also going to depend on how much work this ends up being. So, we'll see what happens. So let's kick into our first feature of our first episode of The Big Booth, and that's going to be a cocktail spotlight on the Moscow Mule.
The Moscow Mule.
Yeah, so it's made in these copper cups, right? And
so the copper cup is actually a very interesting piece of history for the Moscow Mule. So how this all started was there was this woman who grew up in Russia. Her name was Sophie. And her father ran the Moscow Copper Company. I know it's a very interesting name, but you can imagine what they did was they made copper products. So at that point, once she was set up, her and her father decided that they were going to go out and try and make these really interesting copper mugs, right? So they put together this whole process. They find out how to make them. They press them. They find everything going the way that they wanted it to. The problem was that her and her father didn't actually know how to sell the copper mugs. So they go around Russia, all over the place in Moscow, trying to find out how they're going to sell these mugs to all these different places, and nobody really cared. In Moscow, a lot of what they drink is just vodka, straight, for the most part.
Right.
And at that time, anyway. This is the 1930s.
Sure.
So they're having trouble getting these sold. They're sitting on an inventory of about 2,000 of them.
Wow.
Now, the interesting part about the copper that they wanted to use is that the copper itself, and you can actually see on mine here, it actually has some condensation on it. The copper itself actually has these thermodynamic properties that keep the cocktail so ice cold. That's why when you're drinking a Moscow Mule, a lot of times you'll notice that your ice doesn't melt as fast as some of the other cocktails that you have. So that was their selling point, but her and her father didn't really know how to sell these cocktails anyway, or these mugs anyway. So they decide, all right, well, America's the land of opportunities, so let's go there. Sophie packs up I'm assuming her clothes, but also 2,000 copper mugs, and ends up finding herself in Hollywood.
I wonder if you could check those, or do you have to put them in the carry-on?
I would assume she probably boated over back in
yeah.
1930s.
That's true, 1930s. Yeah, she come over to Spitfire.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm not quite sure my travel agent has those histories, but I'll see if I can look it up. But so anyway, so she comes over, she finds herself in Hollywood. She's going door to door again, trying to sell these copper mugs. Now, she finds that her husband is going to be over and over and over again telling her, get these out of the house, get these out of the house. She decides she doesn't want to see this process that her, these mugs that her father and her ended up pressing and putting together this giant project. She doesn't want to see them end up in a landfill. So she doubles her efforts, goes all up and down the Sunset Strip, and she ends up finding herself in the famed Cock and Bull bar at that time. Now, the owner of the Cock and Bull, his name is John. He had actually just purchased Smirnoff.
Was he the cock or the bull?
I'm not sure which one. I think he was the N in the middle there.
Continue.
So John ended up purchasing Smirnoff, which was actually the Smirnoff that we know today as the vodka producer. He had previously run a company that was very large in distributing other products like A1 and things like that, but he was struggling to to sell his vodka. So there's now the Cock and Bull also produced their own ginger beer as well, and they were trying to get people interested in ginger beer and their different products, ginger beer, vodka, and it just wasn't working. Now, cocktails have this interesting history of, and just liquor and libations in general have this interesting history of whatever my grandfather drank is probably what I'm going to end up drinking because I don't want to drink like my parents. So at the time, it's a very interesting thing.
Okay.
So, and it follows this really cyclical, cycle that we have now. That's why, as we sit here in 2022, some of the old classic cocktails are coming back. Things that you can think, oh, my grandfather always drank gin. My grandfather drank old fashions and Manhattans and things like that. At the time in the about 1941, whiskey and rye and things like that, obviously America's beverages were the things that were popular here. So vodka just wasn't on the mark. Now, she comes in, decides to meet with these guys. They sit around for the evening and say, well, let's develop a cocktail that's actually going to be awesome in this mug. After a couple of failed different concoctions, they actually come up with what we now know as the Moscow Mule, which is vodka, lime juice, and ginger beer. At that point, history was made. That was the first time in 1941 that the Moscow Mule actually became known and became one of the highest selling cocktails in the United States as of now. The 90s saw this big revolution with vodka in general, a lot of martinis and things back then, but the Moscow Mule has been around since the 40s.
Wow, and not from Moscow.
Not from Moscow,
No.
just the cups themselves.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So yeah, the Moscow Mule. Now, are there different types of mules? Mulei?
Yeah,
Muleses?
Muleses is the
Muleses,
scientific. Yeah. The different. Now I don't even mules. Yeah. Why is that so hard to figure out?
I don't know.
It's just the pure.
We're going to need to
put
find an
S on
English
it.
teacher
Yeah.
and ask.
Yeah, I think it's just mules. The different mule. You can pretty much do anything with the mules. I mean, the interesting part about classic cocktails now is that you kind of have this issue of like when does it stop being a mule and start being something else, depending on what you add to it. So here at Stumptown, we actually do a peach version and a strawberry version and a blueberry version and a kiwi version and all of these different things. I mean, actually last weekend, one of our bartenders, Kaylee, was messing around behind the bar trying to come up with something interesting for our guests because we always say, if you don't see something on the menu that you like, we'll make you something interesting anyway. And she actually did it with a gunpowder gin that was absolutely delicious. So one of the things that we'll see coming back onto the menu, hopefully in our summer menu that we're going to roll out here in just a little while. So you can really play around with this product, this base recipe many different ways to make it a very, very good cocktail. But realistically, it's surprising how much the copper mug actually plays a part in
just keeping it cold. Because I've noticed, and if, you're listening to us, obviously maybe jingle it or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's been sitting here for as long as we've been talking. Still, the ice hasn't melted.
Still have ice in it. I mean, in the cup itself,
it melted in mine, but mine's empty. Yeah,
and one of the things is that's sort of a hallmark of the copper mugs is you'll always find them with a handle for that purpose, so that because you don't want to transfer.
Cold, right.
You don't want to transfer the heat of your hand back into the mug because it will transfer just as quickly.
Gotcha.
So it's all of these are always going to have a handle.
All right.
Another interesting thing that people always ask about is it harmful to put a cocktail into copper, because a lot of people are worried about copper leaching into the cocktail. It's kind of a different thing that people always end up asking about. Well, you can see actually in your cocktail mug there, the insides are usually lined with a steel or something like that, or some sort of brushed, or on the inside brushed nickel or something like that.
Sure.
But even in the older mugs, the science behind it, you need, I think it's 0.5 parts per million for that to happen, and just realistically, the science behind it it's not in the mug, hopefully, fast enough for it to leach enough copper for there to be any kind
so
of
it's not like an old house and lead poisoning,
right?
From paint
Exactly,
or anything like that. Because I think that's probably where people are getting that. Is thinking about the old houses and old lead and old copper mugs and things like that.
When you put like acidic things in copper, tomato sauces in copper pots and stuff like that,
right?
They tell you not to do that when cooking, and that's what a lot of our cocktailing is just cooking with different ingredients. There's a lot of very measured things we do. We always sort of equate what we do as far as quote unquote mixology, and that's a term we'll talk about later as well. But mixology I always kind of equate to cooking is to baking what regular bartending is to cocktailing, whereas when cooking, you can kind of play around with a lot of your resources and move to taste as you go along, whereas cocktailing is a very measured, precise thing.
Right.
And we'll talk about, we have another episode planned where we're going to talk about some of the tools that we use to kind of justify how we do things and why they taste, why we use those tools to make sure that things taste the way that they do.
All on future episodes. That's called a tease.
That's right.
That
is.
So, okay, last question that I thought of while you were talking about that. You said these are made with ginger beer. That is not the same as ginger ale?
No, it's a different process. Now, you can still make them with ginger ale. It's a little sweeter, but ginger beer is going to have more of that ginger flavor in it.
Gotcha.
Just because of how it's made. It's going to carry a lot more of that ginger flavor. And what the ginger does is sort of brighten everything up. It's sort of like a garnish or like salt and pepper. I always equate different things to cooking because it's what we're doing, but especially with like lime juice and ginger together, it's a very bright cocktail when you think about the flavor profile of it. So it's very fresh, very refreshing, and it's very forward on the palate. So
but the one we're going to make today is ginger beer. That's the one that's on the menu at Stumptown Station.
Yeah, just our classic mule. We're going to make it with a locally distilled spirit, fresh squeezed lime juice, and a ginger beer.
So we're going to take all this knowledge. We're going to head over to the bar. We're going to get Brandon to make us one or 2 or
6,
3 or how many crew do we have here? So but first I'm going to run down this week's highlights, the upcoming events, and what's going on at Stumptown Station in the Stumptown Station news break. Hey, it's Brian from the Big Booth Podcast, and I have in my grubby little hands what's happening this week. We got trivia on Wednesday night. It's always your opportunity to come in and see if you're smarter than Scott. On Friday, we've got Mike Ramsey, the master of hats. We don't know what he's going to be wearing, but it's going to be happening Friday night. David Porter on Saturday. It's Super Bowl weekend. You want to make sure you come out and party with us. And also a big secret, there's a thing coming up. It's called karaoke, so keep an eye on our social media for that. And hey, if you haven't seen it, also releasing this week is our new podcast. It's called The Big Booth by Stumptown Station. Go on your favorite podcast provider, and you can find it there. Hey, welcome back. We're powering through our pilot episode of The Big Booth. And for those not watching on YouTube and listening to the podcast, we have moved behind the bar so we can make the Moscow Mule.
That's right.
And so we got Brandon back here. He's going to show us how to do this and try to talk through it. So we've got, the folks that are only able to listen are able to sort of imagine with their mind's eye what's happening. So what do we got laid out?
All right, so I start out with my copper mug, as we discussed. That is a very important part of the Moscow Mule. I also have my little measuring device. This is called a jigger. This is a bell jigger specifically, 2 separate sides with different measurements on the inside. Helps me make sure that I get the precise measurements into the cocktail.
What are the measurements?
So we actually start out we actually start out with a full measure of vodka, and then we're going to do
the
measurements on here. So it's 2 ounces. The full side on both is 2 ounces on this side and 1 ounce here, and then it goes all the way from a 1/2 ounce up to whatever the full bell
look
is.
at that. There's lines on the inside.
Little
I bet
lines on the
people
inside.
That sit on that side of the bar never see those.
Correct.
Lines.
Yeah, there's lines on the inside, and you can actually see where the measurements actually come up to. So that's why oftentimes your bartenders are going to be pouring to a certain amount. You may not see them fill it all the way up, but a completely full jigger on this side is 1 ounce, and this side is 2 ounces.
All right. So there you go. Random sidetrack.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. One of the more important bar tools that we use, basically because as we've talked about before, measurements in cocktails are really, really important. So, however, one of the more important ingredients that we use is ice. So we actually are going to start out with a nice glass of fresh ice here. And the reason why we fill our glass first is because this cocktail is made to be as cold as possible. So we set that up and we let our glass itself, our mug itself, start to chill. We want that going as cold as possible. So then we're going to start next. We're going to move to our vodka. We use Salamander vodka from Great Wagon Road, locally distilled here in Charlotte by a good buddy of ours, Ollie Mulligan. One of my favorite vodkas, it's actually using spring water out of Asheville, North Carolina, which is pretty cool. No added sugars or anything like that in here, so just a really good, pure, clean vodka. So we start with a full measure here. For us, it's 1.5 ounces. So we go to there, find my little line on the inside, and right into my cocktail glass. Okay, put that back. Next, we're going to do our lime juice. I use about 1/2 ounce. You're going to want to move this around as you, you're going to want to change your measurements as you see fit. Sometimes you want a little more acidic, a little less acidic. It's really going to be determined by your ginger beer. We use Fever Tree ginger beer, one of the better ginger beers out there in my opinion. Just a really good solid ginger beer, got a lot of good ginger flavor. And you'll even see some clouding in the bottles. That tells you that you get some of that ginger there itself. And we're just going to top.
The ginger beer you can get in a store.
Yeah, you can actually get Fever Tree ginger ale at your local grocery store. Yep.
And then Great Wagon Road.
Yep.
And in the Charlotte area, at least, you can get that at the liquor store. I don't know if you're
correct.
listening in Massachusetts.
Yeah, a couple of nearby states to North Carolina as well.
Yeah, we'll put links to all of these on the YouTube, and we'll put links to all of these on our webpage as well.
Yeah, and if you don't have, whatever your favorite vodka is, this just happens to be my favorite. But you can use whatever it is that you like. Now, we had talked about a few different flavors and things as well. You can use flavored vodkas in there. We were actually having a discussion a little while ago about using a grapefruit vodka or a lemon or something, whatever it is. You can change those flavors as you'd like at home. So for here, there's not actually going to be a solid measurement. We're actually just going to top that up. So we're going to see that ice collapse into the glass, which is what we want. So it's hard to see on the camera, and especially if you're not even watching, but we overfilled our mug. And the reason why is because, again, as we had talked about, this is a there's some thermodynamics that go on here to melt this ice just a bit as we added our liquor. So you'll see now there's actually a good amount of ice in there. I can move that around a bit. I give it a nice little stir just to make sure that everything's all nice and combined. And then we're going to finish it off with our lime wedge garnish. And I think a lime wedge garnish is a really nice thing to add. Again, coming back to sort of how cocktailing and cooking are similar. To me, a garnish, and we'll talk more about this in another episode too, but to me, a garnish is sort of like salt and pepper on the table, right? So when I serve you this cocktail, if you want more lime, that's what the garnish is there for. So when you have a really great cocktail bar, really great bartender, they should give you a nice fresh lime, a lot of juice in there so that you can make the adjustment yourself. And that is how we...
You beat me to that, because that was exactly the question I was going to ask is, okay, so you give this to me as the consumer on that side of the bar.
Yep.
What am I supposed to do with the lime? Now, is it like, who was it, Walt Disney, that wouldn't hire anybody if they immediately put salt on things before they tried it?
Yeah.
Similar thing here where, I would want to try it first, and then if I want more lime, squeeze the lime.
Correct, yeah. My advice on any cocktail that you're drinking is take a bite first, right? Take just a nice big sip of it first, and make sure that you've got what you want. And if you need to make your adjustment at that point, then you can add more lime. If you want it a little sweeter, you can add a little more ginger beer. There's no harm in adding some simple syrup to this as well. A lot of recipes will actually call for simple syrup too, just to add a little bit of that sweetness in there. A lot of times the acidity in the cocktail itself will be balanced out by just a little bit of sugar. So you can pull that aside as well. Okay. So it works out pretty good.
So that's the Moscow Mule, and if you want to try it, you can make it at home. You can follow what Brandon did and make it at home, or even better, you can come into Stumptown Station in Matthews, North Carolina, and buy one.
Absolutely.
Buy one. Okay, so that's the Moscow Mule. Appreciate it, Brandon. That was educational. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed that. While we're here, I'm going to go ahead and move to that next segment. So it's just a natural transition.
I like it.
And we call this Q&A with Brandon. And this is probably going to become my favorite part of every single episode, because you guys get to send us questions, and then I'll read the questions off, and we'll let Brandon answer them. And then the best question, we're going to give him a T-shirt. So in a Stumptown Station t-shirt. So I do have some of the questions here that I, since we're the first episode, I did kind of solicit for questions around and talk to folks that had been at the bar, and we've solicited online. So let's see, we have John from Chicago wants to know, does all bourbon have to be made in Kentucky? Is that a criteria to be bourbon?
That's actually a very common misconception. So actually, as of, I think, 2017, all 50 states in the United States have a bourbon distillery, including Hawaii. But no, it does not have to be made in Kentucky. However, it does have to be made in the United States. So that's the only one of the major requirements as far as location is just in the United States. So no, it can be made anywhere, but there's a whole host of things that have to go into, rules you have to use in order to make bourbon, but making it in Kentucky. To be able to call it bourbon, yeah. Okay. Otherwise, it's whiskey. Okay. So all bourbons are whiskeys, not all whiskeys are bourbons.
Okay.
But
now, is that the same rules like in Champagne, where it's got to come from a certain area of France?
Yeah, tequila follows the same rules. Yeah.
So I knew there was something else.
Yeah. So, and it's not necessarily as regional as Champagne. However, when it comes to bourbon itself, all of the other rules are the things that make it bourbon.
Okay.
But it's not, does not have to come from Kentucky. Kentucky was just where it started, and Kentucky's most famously known for bourbon, mostly because the natural limestone that exists under Kentucky is very good for filtering water, which is the most important ingredient into bourbon, well, one of.
Okay.
And then also Kentucky gets all 4 seasons.
Right.
So there's a nice, when you put it in the barrel, there's a nice expand and contract that happens from summer to winter.
Because they get so hot and then so cold.
Correct, yeah. So there's a lot of things that go into bourbon, which I know we're going to talk about, and I'm really excited about it, but the Kentucky rule is not one that needs to be
So
broken.
that's a good question. Here's one. This should be a softball. Michael, his handle is the Hat Guy from Matthews. What do you drink at home?
What do I drink at home? A lot of it is whatever I have on hand. Surprisingly, I don't cocktail as much at home.
Whatever's in the cabinet,
Yeah, whatever-
that's kind of what I'll drink.
Whatever is shown up over time.
Look, Chambord.
Yeah, exactly. So I end up with a lot of whatever's on the shelf, but I keep a lot of whiskey at home. I like trying a lot of different bourbons, a lot of different whiskeys, but I'll try anything at the house just to see. That's usually where I start to try and find new products, but most of the time it's just whatever the spirit is on ice, just so I can get a good feel for what it is.
So basically just one-on-ones because it's easy.
Yeah, one-on-ones because it's easy. I mean, if you're an accountant, you're not going to sit at home in front of your computer and doing spreadsheets all. Well, some do,
Some
but
do.
yeah, that's true. But I'm not that guy. So I definitely at home I'm either drinking Quinn's and Coke, which is my go-to, another product that Great Wagon Road makes that I enjoy, or just a couple of simple cocktails here and there.
Okay.
If I'm having a party or something, obviously I'll host a little more and have some better cocktails.
Okay.
But yeah, one-on-ones.
So our next one, Daniel from Columbus wants to know, what's the difference between a bartender and a mixologist? And we talked about this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the history of the mule.
Yeah, like we had said, I think that bartending is cooking and mixology is sort of baking, but mixology takes place prior to ever opening the bar. Mixology really takes place in research. It takes place at home. It takes place in books. It takes place in the kitchen. So a lot of mixology is about preparation and planning, whereas cocktailing is kind of more the preferred nomenclature, I would say, because that's what we're doing. We're actually making cocktails for you. Mixology is sort of the science of what we do in research and menu development and researching different products and going to distilleries, and all of that to me is mixology, whereas bartending is the social component. Bartending really is about connecting with the people across from you, doing the things that you see people do behind a bar all day long.
Okay.
I really don't think that there's a big difference between bartending and cocktailing. It's just the product that you produce. But really, when you think about it, the mixology is the science and the preparation. Bartending is the social and the service aspect of everything.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So that kind of leads us to our next one. When you're thinking about recipes, Amanda from Charlotte wants to know, what's your favorite cocktail to make? And why?
And why?
So that's 2 questions.
All right. My favorite, honestly, is the Old Fashioned. I absolutely love that cocktail. The history of it is fascinating, as well as it's something that you can play with so many different ways and add and subtract and make so many just different adjustments to it. Our cocktail, our Old Fashioned here at Stumptown is really one of the best out there. I mean, we're repeatedly told all the time how much people enjoy it. We have people that are all over the world that try them in many different bars in Dublin. We've got people in Germany. We've got people in Japan and the Philippines, and they just haven't found a better one yet. So
informal polling
Yeah,
shows
that's right.
that we do have the best Old Fashioned.
That's exactly right. So that's my favorite one. I like it because it's elegant. I like it because it uses a little bit of all of the skills. It uses a little bit of, the fluid dynamics of the ice melting into the cocktail, making sure you have the right thing. We use bitters, which adds a whole different flavor to the cocktail. Really good base spirits really matter. We actually make our own cherries here in-house as well, using a Lithuanian spirit, Lithuanian style spirit called Krupnikos. It's another locally distilled product here from North Carolina. And it uses wildflower honey and whole spices to make its cool flavor. I just really enjoy what we have, and I think that that's a cocktail that you can play with at home over and over and over again and really dial it in to find something that you really enjoy.
Just the mix that you like, right. And all right, last one, Robert from Williamsport. He wants to know, how do you come up with your cocktail ideas? So when you're coming up with something like on the winter menu, there's an angry elf. Where do these come from?
A lot of it actually is, it's actually a really complicated process, believe it or not. So it's a lot of failure. I mean, with a lot of what we do, we actually play around with so many different ingredients and so many different things. We're always trying to find interesting ways to put stuff together. So much so that oftentimes we actually have to back up and go back to our classics and sort of start over. We've done 235 plus different cocktail recipes on our menu, but it's just starting with the base spirit, finding some other flavors with that base spirit, finding some good solid flavor notes that are in there, and then using, again, books and different, asking folks and whatever that might be, blending those flavors in either new and interesting ways or really cool classic ways to make sure that you have a good solid base for the cocktail. And we try not to make things that are too far one direction, too sweet, too unbalanced. Okay. I think the trick to a good cocktail is a nice balance. So when you find all those flavors and you can kind of marry them together, then you workshop it a little bit, you make a bunch of them, and eventually you find the thing that you like. So it's a lot of trial and error, but it works out pretty well for us.
All right. Well, hey, if you have a question for Brandon, you're going to want to send it to us. It's at the big booth at Stumptown Station, or just put it in the comments for wherever you're listening to the podcast or wherever you're watching us on YouTube or whatnot. And you'll win a free T-shirt for the one that Brandon votes is the best question.
I think our best question today was actually, does all bourbon have to be made in Kentucky?
All right, fair enough.
That's the one I vote
John
for.
From Chicago. He's a winner. And let's see, what's coming up next? So let me tell you about episode 2. We've planned a few of these, and whether we continue these, like we talked about earlier in the show, it really depends on your feedback, along with how much work does this end up actually being. But in episode 2, we already have that planned. We're going to be covering all the news and events of the week. Plus, we'll get into... somebody's calling me. We're going to be getting into the 4 parts of a cocktail. And what are the 4 parts of a cocktail? And in every cocktail, right?
Yeah, every cocktail has basically a starting point. And we'll talk about how to basically make you the best bartender at your next home party. If you understand how to do that, boy, you can make a bunch of different things. And that's, kind of goes back to the other question of how do we make stuff up? Well, we start there.
So I don't want to blow anything in the episode, but I'm going to guess one part is alcohol.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, yeah.
See, that's the same. I'm already ahead.
That's
All
right.
Cool. Again, we're not sure what our cadence is going to be for these or how often we're going to do it, so give us your feedback. Let us know what you think on these podcasts. Send us your feedback along with your questions for Brandon to the big booth at Stumptown Station. Thanks, Brandon, for doing all that research and preparing all that information. Shout out to our crew who's behind the camera and behind the microphones here, and we're all going to... Are we going to share this, or are we going to make some more of these, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I mean, you guys,
some more of these.
Everybody has the recipe now, so...
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on The Big Booth by Stumptown Station. Cheers.